The night was cold, and the wind outside howled against the wooden walls of the cabin. Inside sat Daniel, a human who lived far from the city. He liked the quiet. He liked the way the snow covered the ground and made the world silent. But that night something strange happened. His window began to fog. The heat from his fire met the freezing air outside. A thick mist formed across the glass. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. When suddenly he froze, there was a shape outside. A hand pressed against the glass. At first he thought his mind was playing tricks. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was a shadow. But then the hand moved slow. Shaking, weak fingers traced words onto the fog. Daniel's heart pounded as letters formed. "Let me in!" He stood quickly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. Who would be outside in this weather? The storm was cruel. No normal traveler could survive long in it. Yet here was someone begging to come inside. Daniel stepped closer to the window, his breath caught. Beyond the glass he could see her, an alien girl. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Her body trembled in the wind. Her face was pale, and she looked like she had been walking for days. The words on the glass stayed clear. The storm outside tried to erase them, but the message was strong. "Let me in." Daniel hesitated. His mind raced. He knew the rules. Humans were warned not to trust wandering aliens. Many of them were dangerous. Many of them lured people into traps. One mistake and you could lose your life, but something about her did not feel like a trap. She looked weak. Her hands shook. Her eyes looked full of fear. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass as if she was losing strength. The fire inside cracked. Daniel felt the warmth. But he looked at her and thought about the freezing cold outside. If he did nothing, she would die. He reached for the latch of the door, but his hand stopped. His thoughts were loud. What if he was letting death into his own home? What if this girl was not a victim but a weapon? Yet when he looked at her again, he saw tears on her cheeks. Frozen by the storm, Daniel opened the door. A wave of icy air rushed inside, making the fire flicker. Snow blew in, and there she was. Standing just a step away, her body shook violently. Her breath came out in clouds of white mist. She looked at him, her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Come in," Daniel said softly. His voice was careful. Almost unsure, she stumbled forward, nearly falling. He caught her arm and pulled her inside. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud. The storm was left outside, but the silence that followed was just as heavy. The girl collapsed near the fire, curling close to the heat. Her hands reached toward the flames as if she had never felt warmth before. Daniel watched her, unsure what to do. Unsure if he had made the right choice. Her skin was pale. Faint patterns glowed along her arms, marks that looked like lines of silver under her skin. She breathed heavily, every breath sounding like pain. For a long moment, neither spoke. Daniel stood near the door, ready to defend himself if needed. But the girl only closed her eyes, whispering something he could not hear. The cabin creaked as the storm outside grew stronger. The fire snapped, throwing sparks upward. Daniel finally moved closer. He placed a blanket over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed. Her eyes opened slightly, meeting his. They were not human eyes. They were bright, deep like liquid light. But they were also tired, scared. Daniel sat back in his chair, his heart still racing. This night had started like any other. But now he had a stranger in his home, an alien girl who had written 3 words on his fogged-up window, 3 words that might change everything. Outside, the storm roared louder. The wind screamed like voices in the dark. And Daniel wondered who she was running from, and why she had chosen his window. He glanced at her again. She had curled under the blanket. Close to the fire, her lips finally moved. This time he could hear her. The words were soft, almost broken. "Thank you," she whispered before her eyes closed and sleep pulled her away. Daniel leaned back, his mind heavy with questions. He stared at the fogged-up window where her message still lingered. "Let me in." Those words burned in his thoughts. He had no idea that by opening his door, he had stepped into something far bigger than a storm. Far bigger than one night. The fire burned low, the storm screamed outside, and the message on the window slowly faded. But the choice had been made, and there was no going back. The storm outside refused to stop. Snow beat against the walls of the cabin like fists of ice. But inside, the air was warm and heavy with silence. Daniel sat on the edge of his chair, his eyes fixed on the alien girl who now slept near the fire. She looked fragile. Her chest rose and fell slowly, every breath sounding like a battle. He had questions. Too many questions. Who was she? Why was she out there alone? And why did she choose his window? But for now, all he could do was watch her breathe. His hand rubbed against the wood of the chair, the rough surface grounding him, reminding him that this was real, not a dream. When the fire cracked loud, she stirred. Her eyes opened halfway, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. Daniel leaned closer, his heart pounding. "You're safe," he whispered. Though he wasn't sure if it was true, she blinked slowly, then sat up with effort. Her body shook. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. Daniel noticed the marks again, strange lines that ran along her arms, silver patterns that shimmered in the light. They were not natural. They looked like scars. Chains burned into her skin. "Water," she whispered. Her voice was weak, broken. Daniel hurried. He poured water into a metal cup and handed it to her. She held it with shaking hands, spilling some, but she drank fast, like someone who hadn't tasted water in days. When she finished, she lowered the cup slowly, her glowing eyes looking straight at him. "Why, did you open the door?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with suspicion. Daniel paused. He didn't know how to answer. He could have said many things, that he pitied her, that he didn't want to watch her die, that he didn't trust himself to do nothing. But instead he said the simplest truth. "Because you asked." She looked at him long, her face unreadable. Then she lowered her gaze to the fire. Her fingers stretched toward the flames as if she wanted to steal its warmth. Outside, a sound echoed through the storm. A deep humming, distant but heavy. Daniel froze. He knew that sound. Not the storm, not the wind. It was something else. She tensed too, her body stiff. Her eyes wide with fear, she turned to the window, pressing herself closer to the fire as though trying to hide in the shadows. "They're looking," she whispered almost to herself. "They're looking for me." Daniel's stomach tightened. His questions grew darker. Who were they? Why did they want her? And what danger had he invited into his home? He stood and moved to the window, brushing away the fog with his hand. Through the storm, faint lights glowed, moving shapes cutting across the snow, not human, not natural. Machines or hunters, it was impossible to tell. But they were searching, their light scanning the ground. Moving closer, Daniel's throat went dry. He turned back to her. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice harsher than he meant. She shook her head, her silver-marked arms pulling the blanket tighter around her body. "If I tell you, you will regret helping me." Daniel felt the weight of her words, but regret was already clawing at him. The hunters outside were too close. If they came here, if they searched his cabin, both of them would be finished. "I don't care who you are," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "But if you want to live, you need to stay quiet, understand?" She nodded once, her glowing eyes fixed on him. Fear sharp in them. The lights outside passed slowly. Moving across the snow like ghosts, Daniel held his breath, praying they wouldn't come near the cabin. Every creak of the wood, every snap of the fire felt like thunder. Minutes dragged, the storm covered their trail, and the lights moved farther away. Finally fading into the distance, Daniel exhaled, his shoulders heavy with relief. He turned to her again, but she was still tense, her fists clenched. "They will not stop," she said quietly. "They will search every place, every shadow, until they find me." Daniel frowned, his patience running thin. "Then why come here? Why me?" She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes. Shame, maybe even sorrow. Her voice cracked as she answered. "Because humans still have kindness, and I had nowhere else left to go." Her words struck him harder than the storm outside. Daniel stared at her, wondering what kind of world had forced her to put her hope in a stranger's window. The fire burned low, the night stretched long. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. He had let her in, but now the question was whether he could keep her safe, and whether he could survive the truth she carried with her. The storm outside howled again, but inside the cabin, a fragile silence returned. Daniel sat back down, his eyes never leaving her. He did not know her name. He did not know her past. But he knew one thing, whatever she was running from, it had now become his problem too. And deep down, a strange feeling stirred in him. Something that felt like both dread and duty. Something that whispered this night would change everything. The fire was burning low. Shadows stretched across the wooden walls of the cabin. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the girl wrapped in his blanket. She had fallen into a restless sleep, her breath shallow, her fingers twitching as if fighting some unseen nightmare. Daniel couldn't shake the words she had whispered earlier. They will not stop. That meant danger wasn't over. It was only waiting outside, pacing like a wolf in the storm. He rubbed his face with his hands, wondering what kind of mess he had just let into his home. Hours passed slowly. The storm began to soften, and silence pressed hard against the cabin walls. Just as Daniel's eyes started to grow heavy, the girl jolted awake, her glowing eyes wide with panic. She pushed herself upright, clutching the blanket tight. "They're close again," she whispered. Her voice shaking, Daniel frowned, listening. He heard nothing but the whine of the wind, but her fear wasn't false, it clung to her like ice. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Who are they? Who's hunting you?" For a long moment she said nothing. Her gaze locked on the fire. The flames danced in her eyes. Finally she whispered, "Hunters, soldiers, shadows, they have many names, but they all belong to the same master." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And you?" She hesitated, her trembling hands slowly pulling back the blanket to reveal her arms again. The glowing silver marks ran across her skin like lightning frozen in flesh. "I was theirs," she said bitterly, "but I ran." Daniel stared. The patterns looked too perfect to be scars, they looked carved, like someone had branded her with purpose. "Those marks," he asked, "what do they mean?" She looked at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Chains," she answered softly. "They bound me, reminded me I was not free, reminded me who I belonged to." Her words struck him deep. Daniel clenched his fists. He hated the thought of anyone being treated like property, human or alien. He leaned back, trying to calm the storm inside his own chest. "You're safe here," he said finally. "They won't find you tonight." She shook her head quickly, her hair falling over her glowing eyes. "You don't understand. They always find, they smell fear. They follow the marks. No one escapes." The way she said it made Daniel's skin crawl. She wasn't just running. She was certain of being caught. Her hopelessness was heavier than the snow piled against the door. He stood pacing across the small room. "Then tell me what I need to know." His voice sharp. "If I'm in this now, I need the truth, all of it." She hesitated again, but the weight of silence pushed her to speak. "My name is Lyra," she whispered. "I was born among them, raised to serve, raised to obey. But I saw too much, I learned too much, and when I realized what they would make me do, I fled." Her name lingered in the air, Lyra. It felt strange yet familiar. Daniel repeated it quietly. "Lyra." She looked at him then, her glowing eyes filled with a strange mix of fear and relief. No one had said her name without hate for a long time. It was as if the sound gave her strength. Outside, the storm finally broke. Silence pressed hard against the cabin, and in that silence, Daniel heard it, faint crunching footsteps in the snow. His heart stopped. Lyra's eyes snapped to the window. Glowing brighter with fear, she mouthed a single word. "Hunters." Daniel grabbed the iron poker from beside the fire. It wasn't much, but it was something. He gestured for her to stay low. Her hands shook as she clutched the blanket tighter. The footsteps came closer, slow, measured. Like predators circling prey, Daniel moved to the door. His ears straining, his breath shallow. He had faced storms, beasts, and even other men in fights, but this felt different. This felt like standing on the edge of something far bigger than himself. Then, just as sudden as it started, the footsteps stopped, silence returned. The cabin creaked, the fire popped. Lyra closed her eyes, whispering words in a language Daniel didn't know, a prayer or a plea. Minutes crawled by. Nothing happened. Finally, Daniel stepped back from the door, the tension slowly loosening in his chest. But he knew this was not the end, only the beginning. Lyra looked at him, her voice breaking. "They won't stop. You should have left me outside. Now they'll come for you too." Daniel shook his head firmly, his voice steady even though his heart thundered. "No, I opened the door, I let you in, and now I'll see it through." Her eyes widened. No one had ever spoken like that to her. No one had ever chosen danger for her sake. A flicker of hope lit in her gaze. The fire dimmed lower, but between them something unseen began to grow. A fragile bond not built on trust yet, but on choice. Daniel had chosen her, and that choice meant everything. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering tracks, hiding signs, but deep in the storm, shadows still moved, watching, waiting. And inside the cabin, Daniel knew his quiet life was gone. The moment she wrote on his window, his world had shifted, and he would never be the same again. The night outside had gone quiet. Too quiet. Daniel stood near the window, staring into the snow, his breath fogged against the glass. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed carried a weight heavier than thunder. He felt it in his bones. Danger was close. Behind him, Lyra sat near the fire, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her glowing eyes followed every move he made. She looked like a cornered animal, ready to flee but too weak to run. Her voice broke the silence, soft and trembling. "They are not far," she whispered. "I can feel them." Daniel turned sharply. "Feel them?" "How?" She touched the silver marks on her arm. The glowing chains etched into her skin. "These were made to bind me, but they also connect me to them. They pull when they draw near, like a leash tugging at my soul." Her words made Daniel's stomach twist. He hated the thought of her being chained, hunted like prey. He clenched his jaw. "Then we need to hide you better." He moved quickly around the cabin, checking corners, checking the door. His cabin was small, built for one man, not built to hide someone who was being hunted. He pulled up a loose floorboard, the small space beneath barely wide enough to fit her. "Get in," he said firmly. Lyra shook her head, fear flashing in her eyes. "No, they'll know, they always know." Daniel knelt in front of her, his voice low but steady. "Then give me a chance. Give me a reason to believe we can outsmart them. Humans aren't as easy to predict as you think." She hesitated, her glowing eyes searching his face. Finally, she nodded, and with his help, she lowered herself into the dark crawl space. He replaced the board, covering it with a rug. His heart thudded hard as he stood. Moments later, the silence outside broke. Faint steps crunched on snow. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Daniel's body tensed. He grabbed the iron poker again, his only weapon. His breath shallow. A knock echoed on the door, not gentle, not polite, but hard, demanding. 3 slow strikes that made the wooden frame shudder. Daniel froze, his mind raced. Should he answer? Should he stay quiet? The knock came again, louder this time. Finally, a voice drifted through the wood, cold and unnatural. "Human, we know she is here." Daniel's blood turned cold. He kept silent, gripping the iron poker tighter. The voice chuckled, deep and cruel. "Do not test us. Open the door and give her to us, and we will let you live." His heart pounded. His mind screamed at him to open the door, to end this before it began. But another voice inside him, quieter yet stronger, refused. He had let her in, and he could not betray that choice. Instead, he stepped closer to the door, his own voice firm. "You've got the wrong cabin." Silence followed, then slow laughter. "Brave little human, but lies will not save you." The door shook violently as if something massive struck it. Dust fell from the ceiling. Daniel braced himself. He could hear Lyra's muffled breathing beneath the floor, her fear bleeding into the air. Another blow hit the door. Harder this time, wood cracked, splinters flew. Daniel knew it would not last long. His mind raced for a plan. Something, anything. His eyes fell on the fire, the flames licking at the logs, the iron poker glowing faintly red at its tip. He thought of human stories, tricks from old times, when men defended homes with nothing but wit and courage. The door groaned, splitting down the middle. A clawed hand forced its way through the crack, long and inhuman. Daniel's body reacted before his mind. He shoved the glowing iron poker into the hand. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. A screech ripped through the night. The hand yanked back, the door slammed. Heavy footsteps retreated into the snow. Silence followed again, broken only by the sound of Daniel's ragged breathing. He stood frozen, his knuckles white around the poker. His ears ringing, he waited, but no more strikes came. The hunters had pulled back, for now Daniel quickly pulled up the floorboard. Lyra's glowing eyes stared at him, wide and terrified. "You fought them," she whispered. Disbelief heavy in her voice. Daniel nodded, his chest heaving. "And I'll fight them again if I have to." Tears filled her eyes. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why? Why risk your life for me?" Daniel looked at her, his voice steady but soft. "Because I couldn't stand there and do nothing. Because no one deserves chains." Lyra covered her face with her hands. Her body shook with silent sobs. For the first time in her life, someone had stood for her. Not for reward, not for duty, but simply because he chose to. The fire flickered low. Shadows danced across the cabin walls. Outside, the hunters waited in the snow, their patience endless, their search far from over. Inside, Daniel sat back down, the iron poker beside him, his eyes never leaving the door. He knew they would return stronger, angrier, but he also knew one thing. He would not hand her over, not now, not ever. The night stretched on, heavy with danger, and Daniel realized something deep inside. His quiet life had ended the moment she wrote those words on his window. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of her fight. The cabin was heavy with silence after the attack. The broken door still shook in its frame. Daniel had pushed furniture against it, but he knew it was only a weak barrier. Outside, the hunters had pulled back, Yet he felt their presence in the snow. Waiting, watching, Lyra sat near the fire again, her knees pulled to her chest. The blanket wrapped around her glowing skin. Her eyes followed the flames, but her thoughts were far away. Daniel could see it. Fear and shame tangled together. He placed the iron poker back into the fire, letting it glow again, then sat down across from her. "Tell me everything," he said firmly. "I can't fight shadows if I don't know what they are." Lyra flinched at his tone. But then she slowly nodded, her voice low and soft. "I wasn't just their servant, I wasn't just a girl in chains. I was their blood." Daniel frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" She lifted her sleeve, showing the marks etched into her arm, silver lines that glowed faintly in the firelight. "These aren't scars, they're sigils burned into me at birth. They mark me as one of the House of Serath, a ruling family of my kind." Her lips trembled. "I am their daughter, their heir." Daniel sat back, his mind racing. He had expected a runaway slave, a refugee maybe, but not this, not a daughter of power. "If that's true," he said slowly, "why are you running from them?" Lyra's eyes shimmered, not from glow but from tears. "Because they wanted to make me a weapon," she whispered, her hands clutching the blanket tight. "My blood gives me access to things. To secrets. They wanted me to command the hunters, to enslave others as they enslaved me, and I couldn't. I couldn't be what they wanted." Her voice cracked. She turned away from him, hiding her face. Daniel felt a weight press into his chest. She wasn't just fleeing chains. She was fleeing her own bloodline, the very people who should have protected her. "Then you ran," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than her. Lyra nodded. "I thought I could disappear. I thought the storm would hide me. But I was wrong." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "And now you're here." She looked at him, her glowing eyes full of questions she didn't dare ask. Finally, she whispered, "Do you regret opening the door?" Daniel thought long before answering. The fear was real, the danger was real, his life would never be the same. But regret? No, not yet. Not when he saw her trembling by the fire. "No," he said simply. "I don't regret it." Something in her broke at his words. Tears slid down her cheeks, but this time she didn't hide them. She let them fall. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint sounds across the snow. Daniel stiffened, listening. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was voices, low, guttural, speaking in a tongue he didn't understand. Lyra stiffened too, fear sparking in her eyes. "They're calling the pack," she whispered. "They'll come in greater numbers now." Daniel stood. Moving to the window, he could see faint lights again, more than before, spreading out in the storm. Searching, always searching, his jaw tightened. "Then we need a plan." He turned back to her, his eyes steady. "You said you didn't want to be their weapon. Fine, but maybe you can still fight them. Not as their heir, but as yourself." Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand. I was never trained to fight. I was trained to obey. I don't know how to be free. I don't know how to be strong." Daniel crouched in front of her, his voice calm but sharp. "Strength isn't about what they carved into you, it's about choice. And you made yours when you ran." Her eyes widened. His words hit her harder than he knew for the first time. Someone didn't see her as a prisoner or as a princess, but as a person with a choice. Silence filled the cabin again. But it was different this time. Not heavy with fear, but with something fragile. "Something new, finally," Lyra whispered. "If I stay, if I fight, they will kill you too." Daniel smiled faintly, tired but firm. "Maybe, but I'd rather die standing with someone who wants to be free than live alone in silence." Her breath caught. Her lips parted, but no words came instead. She reached toward the fogged-up window with trembling fingers. Tracing new words into the glass, the steam from the fire had misted it again. "Thank you," she wrote slowly, her glowing fingers leaving trails of light. Daniel stared at it, his chest heavy but warm. He nodded once. "You don't need to thank me yet. The night isn't over." Outside, the hunters moved closer, their lights dancing through the snow like ghosts. The storm had hidden them before, but now they were growing bolder. Lyra sat straighter, her glowing eyes locked on the window, a flicker of resolve shining through her fear, and Daniel knew whatever came through that door next, neither of them would face it alone. The fire snapped, the cabin creaked, and the night stretched on, filled with danger and promise alike. The fire was almost gone, only glowing embers painted the cabin in a dull red light. Daniel sat stiff in his chair, the iron poker hot in his hands. His eyes never left the door. Outside he could hear them, shadows moving through snow, voices carried by the wind. The hunters had returned. Lyra sat close to the floor, her back against the wall. Her glowing eyes filled with fear, but also something sharper now. Something Daniel hadn't seen before. "Resolve," she whispered softly. "They're circling us." "They know I'm here." Daniel didn't answer. He could hear the crunch of boots in every direction. He stood, moving quickly. He pulled down a wooden shelf and pushed it against the broken door, adding more weight. It would not stop them long, but maybe it would slow them. "Listen," Daniel said firmly, his voice low but steady. "They want you, not me. But they'll kill me if they get the chance, so if we're going to survive, we need to fight together." Lyra shook her head, fear trembling in her words. "You don't know them. You don't know what they are capable of. A loud crash cut her off. The wall shook as if struck by a massive force. Dust rained from the ceiling. Daniel's grip tightened on the poker. "I don't need to know," he said sharply. "I just need to stand my ground." Another crash. This time against the window, glass cracked, and a clawed hand reached through. Lyra gasped. Daniel swung the poker hard. Smashing against the hand, the creature screeched and pulled back. The hunters laughed, the sound unnatural, cold, like broken metal grinding. Their voices filled the night, taunting, "Human, you can't protect her. Open the door, and we will end your suffering quickly." Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice steady. "You'll get nothing from me." The laughter grew louder, and then the final assault began. The door shook under repeated blows, claws and fists smashing against it. Cracks spread down the wood. Daniel braced himself, but his heart raced. He couldn't hold them back forever. Lyra pressed her hands against her glowing marks, her body trembling. "If they catch me, they'll take you too. They'll chain you. They'll use you as they tried to use me." Daniel looked at her, his eyes hard. "Then let's make sure they don't catch you." The door burst open. Splinters flew. 3 hunters rushed inside, their bodies tall, armored in black plates, their faces hidden by masks that glowed faint red. Their claws dripped with frost. Daniel didn't think. He charged, swinging the red-hot poker. It struck the first hunter across the chest. Sparks flew. The smell of burning filled the air. The creature screeched, staggering back. The second hunter lunged at him, claws aimed at his throat. Daniel ducked, ramming his shoulder into its chest. The force sent both of them crashing against the wall. Pain shot through his body, but he didn't stop. He swung again, the poker smashing into its mask, cracking it. The third hunter moved toward Lyra. Ignoring Daniel, she pressed against the wall, fear freezing her in place. But then Daniel's voice roared across the room. "Lyra, fight!" Her eyes snapped open, something inside her sparked. She raised her glowing arms. The silver marks blazed brighter than before. Light spilled across the cabin. The hunter froze mid-step. As if caught by invisible chains, Daniel stared in shock. Lyra's voice echoed, soft yet powerful. "I was not made to obey. I was made to break free." The hunter screeched, thrashing, but her power held it still. Her body shook violently, her strength untrained, yet her will strong enough to stop the creature for a moment. Daniel took the chance. He swung hard, the poker striking deep into the creature's neck. Sparks and black smoke hissed as it fell. Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping, her glowing arms dimming. I can't hold it long." Daniel knelt beside her, pulling her back to her feet. "You don't have to," he said firmly. "Just don't give up." The other 2 hunters regrouped, their red eyes glowing with rage. One hissed, its voice sharp, "The human bleeds for her." "Foolish," Daniel spat blood from his lip, gripping the poker tighter, his chest heaving. Better to bleed for someone than to live a coward. The hunters lunged again. The cabin shook under the fight. Wood splintered, fire sparks flew, but this time, Daniel was not alone. Lyra's glowing marks flared again, weak but enough to disrupt their movements. Each flicker gave Daniel an opening. Each flash of light bought him a chance to strike. Minutes dragged like hours. The fight was chaos, but slowly, painfully. The hunters pulled back, wounded and snarling. One hissed through broken teeth. "This is not over, human. She is ours." They retreated into the snow, their glowing eyes fading into the night. Leaving silence behind, Daniel dropped to one knee, exhausted, his body covered in cuts and bruises, his chest rising and falling like a hammer. Lyra crawled to his side. Her trembling hand touched his arm. You stood against them." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Barely," he muttered, then looked at her seriously. "But we're still breathing, and that means we're not done." Lyra's eyes softened, her voice breaking. "No one has ever fought for me. Not like this. Daniel squeezed her hand, his voice quiet but steady. Then remember this night, because from now on, you're not alone. The fire flickered low. Smoke curled through the broken cabin. Outside, the hunters waited, but inside, for the first time, Lyra felt something she had never known before, not fear, not chains, but hope. And Daniel knew with certainty that his fight was no longer just his, it was theirs, together, against the storm waiting outside. Snow fell like ash over the cabin ruins. The night was still, but Daniel knew it was only the eye of the storm. The hunters had retreated, but not defeated. They would come back stronger, faster, with more numbers. He sat against the cracked wall, blood drying on his cheek, his hands gripping the blackened iron poker. Lyra knelt beside him, her glowing arms trembling, her face pale from exhaustion. The marks on her skin pulsed faintly, weaker now but alive. She looked at him with worry. "You can't fight them all," she whispered. "Not alone, not even with me." Daniel forced a weak smile, his breath heavy. "Good thing we're not alone anymore, you and me. We're enough." Lyra shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. They'll keep coming. They'll send entire squads if they must. I was not supposed to survive this long. And now you've made yourself their enemy too." Daniel's eyes hardened, his voice steady despite his pain. "Then let them come." Outside, the crunch of snow returned, faint at first, then louder. A chorus of footsteps closing in. Lyra stiffened, panic sparking in her glowing eyes. She pressed her back against the wall, whispering, "Too many, too many." Daniel stood slowly, every muscle screaming. Yet his grip on the poker did not loosen. He looked at her, his voice sharp. "Lyra, listen to me. They want you scared. They want you to believe you're weak, but I've seen what you can do. You stopped one of them when you thought you couldn't. You're stronger than you know." Tears filled her eyes. Her lips trembled. "I don't want to be strong. I just wanted to be free." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Then fight for that freedom, not just for yourself, but for everyone who never got the chance. Fight because you chose to, not because they told you to." Something in his words lit a fire inside her. The chains etched into her arms glowed brighter. Not with fear this time, but with defiance. She stood shoulders straight, her glowing eyes fixed on the broken door. The hunters arrived, their shadows filling the doorway more than before, their red masks glowing like embers in the snow. Their leader stepped forward, taller, cloaked in black, his voice deep and cold. "Human, step aside, give us the girl, and you may live." Daniel stepped in front of Lyra, his stance firm, his voice calm. "She's not yours." The leader tilted his head, amused. "You fight with sticks and fire. You bleed already. Do you think you can win?" Daniel raised the poker, its tip glowing red from the embers, his eyes unwavering. "I don't need to win. I just need to make sure you lose." The hunters roared, the cabin shook as they rushed forward. But this time Lyra did not shrink. She lifted her arms, the silver marks burning like fire. Light erupted from her skin, flooding the room in brilliance. The hunters stumbled, blinded, their movements faltering. Daniel charged into the light, striking with all his strength, each blow guided by her glow. Together they moved like one, human grit and alien power colliding against the dark. The leader snarled, forcing through the light, his clawed hand reaching for Lyra. But she stood tall, her voice steady. "I was born in chains, but I will not die in them." The glow surged, the marks on her arms cracked and split, releasing a wave of energy that blasted through the cabin. The hunters screamed, thrown back into the snow, their bodies burning with silver fire. The leader staggered, his mask shattering, his dark eyes wide with shock. Daniel gritted his teeth. Raising the poker for one last strike, he slammed it into the leader's chest. The creature roared before collapsing into the snow. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of dying flames. Lyra fell to her knees, trembling, her glow dimming as exhaustion consumed her. Daniel dropped beside her, pulling her close, both gasping for breath. Outside, the snow buried the hunters' remains, covering them like they had never existed. For the first time all night, the silence felt real, not heavy with threat, but peaceful. Daniel looked at Lyra, his voice soft. "It's over. At least for now." She leaned against him, her eyes closing, tears trailing down her cheeks. Why did you fight for me?" Daniel smiled faintly, brushing snow from her hair. "Because when you wrote those words on my window, you weren't just asking to come in from the storm. You were asking for someone to see you, to believe you deserved a chance. And I couldn't ignore that." Lyra opened her eyes, glowing faintly. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, she whispered. Then let me write one more thing. With shaking fingers, she reached for the fogged window, tracing letters slowly into the mist. This time, not let me in, but thank you, human. Daniel stared at the words, his chest tight. He nodded. No, thank you for reminding me that sometimes opening a door is the bravest thing a man can do. The fire crackled softly. The storm passed into silence, and in the broken cabin, a bond stronger than chains had been forged, human and alien no longer alone. And though the galaxy outside still burned with threats, for this night in this place they had won.